A lot of this story it's about me, and it's going to sound like I'm boasting of myself, maybe of my abilities, but I can promise you that this is a story about God. It is not a story about me. Just as Jamie mentioned Brian and how God has used his story to glorify himself, God has somehow used me and his story to glorify himself. And so I'm only sharing you what God has given me, not what I have done. So this story, it started 22 years ago. I was graduating from university, and honestly, I was a drunk. I was a drunk, and I was chasing everything that the world had to offer in order to try to find some sense of purpose, some sense of fulfillment. I played baseball in university. Baseball couldn't give me this sense of fulfillment. I chased women. They couldn't give me this sense of fulfillment. I chased money and things. Those things couldn't satisfy this urge and this itch to matter. But I found God. Actually, when I say I found God, God found me. And when he found me, he began to show me this epic adventure, this epic story that he had written for me. And he was going to include me in this epic story, this epic adventure. It started as a high school teacher and a high school coach. I coached American football and baseball for 10 years. There were many parts of that part of this story that I absolutely loved to be a part of. But God told me in the end of that 10th year, he said, it's time to resign from teaching. I have something else for you, something bigger, something greater, for my name's sake. And it took a simple step of obedience to step away from a job that certainly didn't make me rich, but it provided everything that my family needed. I have a wife, I have 3 children, and it was a guaranteed income every month with good insurance and a great retirement plan. And God said, walk away from that. So I did. I resigned, and it was just a simple step of obedience. And I started my own business. And in starting my own business, God provided for us financially in a way that I could not believe. Our business was growing at a rate that was impossible to maintain. We were making more money than we knew what to do with. So we were able to bless so many other people because of the money that we were making. We were able to meet other people's felt needs because of the money that God had blessed us with. And then he also opened up a door for me to go on a short-term mission trip to a country that you may have heard of, South Africa. South Africa. I went there in my first trip in 2014. And let me just tell you, it was not a simple step of obedience for me to go to South Africa. Now, many of you may not know what this means, but some of you in this room do. But I'm a Georgia boy. I'm a Georgia boy. And the way that we're referred to in America is we're referred to as rednecks. Now, most people in America, when they refer to us as rednecks, they're actually making fun of us. But as a Southern boy, a Georgia boy, a ditch digger, we consider it a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor because that redneck comes at a cost. That redneck comes because we're raised outside. That redneck is red because we're raised to farm and to hunt and to fish so that we can survive. So, something about rednecks is we don't leave our homes. We stay in our communities and in our homes, and we get married, and then we make babies in those homes, and then we stay in those homes until we die, and then we go to heaven. But this guy was called to go to South Africa, and that was quite a big leap for me. But I went kicking and screaming because, as most of you married people here know, when my wife says do something, I just obey. So I went to South Africa the first time and I fell in love with it, and I loved it so much that I couldn't wait to go back again. So a year later, I went back. And it was on this trip, it's a very long story, but to make it very short, while I was there, my wife actually went with me on the second trip, and God made it very clear to both of us that we were to go back to America, sell everything that we owned, and to move to South Africa full time. And so that was January of 2016. By September of 2016, my wife, myself, and our 3 children had sold everything and had moved to South Africa. So as we moved to South Africa and we began to minister to the tribe, the Xhosa people, I hear names that mean things. They named all of our family as well. They named my wife Tanda, which is a female version of love. Tondo for my oldest boy, which is the male version of love. And then Malibongwe, which is actually a Zulu term, which means we praise him. And then my daughter was Siyabonga. Siyabonga is we praise him in Xhosa. But then they got to me and they named me Imbi. And I thought, yo, this is going to be a great one. What did they name me? I found this name means ugly. So Kuda, I love your name. I love its meaning. I don't love mine so much. But I do have an African name, just so you know. So we were in South Africa and we were ministering there amongst the Xhosa people. And I learned something. In the first 3 years that we were there, I was burning my candle at both ends. I was doing all of the preaching, I was doing all of the evangelizing, all of the discipling, all of the teaching. Everything fell on my shoulders. We had started a skills center that developed carpentry skills. And as we were teaching these carpentry skills, I was teaching. I was the president of the board. So every time there was a problem, they would look to me. Every time a teacher was sick, it was me who had to step in to teach and fill in for them. And all of this to say that I knew that something had to be wrong with this model that I was living out in this community. And then that moment, you guys remember this moment. It's this word called COVID. COVID hit and life was officially shut down. Now in South Africa, you were not allowed to leave your property. You couldn't even go for a walk in the neighborhood. You were literally locked in your property, except to go to the grocery store once a week and to go to the hospital if you were sick. So I was locked in my property with lots of time on my hands, and I found this book that someone had left for me. It was a book called The Great Omission. And The Great Omission is a book written by Jamie's father, Steve. And in this book, it talks about, the foundation of the book is how Western missionaries have done a lot of doing for indigenous people. But in that work of doing for them, we omit them from the process. And that is exactly what I had done, again, unknowingly. This is not something that I set out to do when I went to South Africa. And so as I realized that I had been doing for these people, I quickly asked if I could get on a phone call with Jamie. And so Jamie allowed for these phone calls every Thursday for about 2 months. And on those phone calls, I just asked him a lot of questions, and we were trying to refocus our strategy, refocus our vision for the world and for this tribe that we were working with. And what I realized that the most important part of this process was I needed to stop doing and start empowering. And guess what happened? As soon as I began to withdraw myself, again, just a simple step of obedience. These are not leaps of blind faith. These are simple steps of obedience. As I began to withdraw myself, as Chris removed himself from the process and God took over, all of a sudden we started to see the skills center flourish. We began to see the church expand and grow to a point where the building that I had built for the people needed to be expanded. And so they came to me to say, how are we going to expand this church? My response was, yeah, man, that's a great problem. I look forward to seeing how you guys solve the problem. And you know what? They did. So as I finish, simple steps of obedience. This is what stewardship looks like. Stewardship is just simple steps of obedience. It is taking what God has given us and then going and training someone else in that. It is taking what God has given us and allowing God to write our story as we part this wisdom on other people. In conclusion, I want to give you a thought. And this was a thought that I had while I was developing a sermon while I was in South Africa, and it's about the story of Peter when he was walking on the water with Jesus. Now, most of the sermons of this story focus on the fact that Peter lost his faith. The storm came, the winds blew, and he took his eyes off of Jesus, and so he began to sink. Well, as I was preparing this sermon, I said, man, there's just something more to this story. Lord, what are you leading me to? What are you trying to tell me? And as I was preparing this sermon, he spoke to me, and God said, stop focusing on Peter's withdrawal from Jesus and focus on the fact that one time in human history, a human being was walking on water. And so as I began to look at Peter, the man, the human being who's walking on water with Jesus, the fact came to be that this question of what were the other 11 disciples, what were they doing while Peter was walking on the water? We have no idea. You know why we have no idea? Because stories don't get written about people who stay in the boat. Now, don't take this out of context. I'm not looking for fame or fortune. I'm not looking for stories or books to be written about me. But what I have realized is that Peter, even though he failed, we are still telling the story of him getting outside of the boat. And so even when I fail, God will continue to write my story if I will just take simple steps of obedience. So the knowledge that you've learned here this week, your knowledge of farming, it's not for you. That knowledge is a vehicle. It is a vehicle to take the gospel of Christ forward. Simple steps of obedience. Thank you.